Unit 6 is all about probability. What are my chances? Taking a look at this continuum, starting with 0 to 1, we're going to talk about what the probability is that something might happen. If there's an even chance, 50-50, it would be in the middle, versus no possibility, versus completely certain, 100% chance. So please take a look. We are going to learn to express probabilities as percents, decimals, and fractions, calculate them as a fraction of sample space, and draw conclusions. The big word here is relative frequency. Please copy the vocabulary section. You can pause the video to do that. Probability is the likelihood or chance of a given event happening, written as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. The sample space is where you list out all the possible outcomes of an experiment. For example, on a number cube, it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any of those things could happen. On a coin, it would be heads or tails. Experimental probability. That would be after you conduct an experiment, and it equals the number of times an event occurs divided by the total number of trials. You'll see a lot of probability starts off with a fraction. Theoretical probability is the likelihood of an event happening based on all the possible outcomes. So this is what should happen in theory. Frequency is a fancy word to say how often something happens. And relative frequency is actually exactly the same as experimental probability. It says how often something happens out of the total number of outcomes. So again, you'll see that these two mean the same thing. So please write experimental in parentheses next to that. All right, taking a look at this page, an experiment is an activity involving chance. Each repetition or observation of an experiment is a trial. Each possible result is an outcome, and the sample space of an experiment is the set of all possible outcomes. An event is an outcome or a set of outcomes in an experiment. And probability is the measure of how likely an event is to occur. So, as you heard before, probability can be written as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent, and the fractions or decimals are from 0 to 1. The percents are from 0% to 100%. The closer the probability is to 1 or 100%, then the more likely it is to occur. The closer it is to 0 or 0%, the less likely it will occur. This is a lot of information, but we'll definitely use it in class, so please write it down. All right, notice with sample space, you often see braces. And then you list all the possible outcomes, just like we wrote in our vocabulary. So for rolling a number cube, the possible outcomes could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. For tossing a coin, you can either get heads or tails. For this spinner, it's really hard to read on here, but I believe it's easier in your packet. The possibilities are red, blue, green, and yellow. And you don't have to worry about whether or not they're equally likely. You're just listing all the possibilities. So now, I would like you to complete the table at the bottom of the page. You already saw some of the answers maybe, but go ahead and remember what we've learned before about converting between fractions, decimals, and percents. Notice that all of the fractions, decimals, percents are between 0 and 1. And notice that you can use any of those forms for probability. Pause the video, finish that, and then you can go ahead and check your work. Remember, it only hurts you to cheat. It doesn't help you to learn. Okay, so check your work. This one should say just 1/4. My apologies, I forgot to fix that on the answer key before. So this is just 1/4, 25, or 0.25 or 25 hundredths, and then 25%. All right. Moving ahead to the next page, we're going to talk about experimental versus theoretical probability, and in class, we're going to do a little bit of each. So remember, theoretical probability is what's supposed to happen, and experimental probability is found by conducting an experiment and recording the outcomes. So Both of them are fractions when you look at the probabilities. Both of them on the top are what's favorable. So what are you looking for? Are you looking for rolling a number cube and getting a 2? Then that would be your favorable outcomes. And then the possible outcomes are, like, if we were to do a number cube, it's 1 out of 6. But for experimental probability, you'd actually roll the number cube and see how many times did I get a 2 and how many total trials did I have. So you should try to figure out what the difference is between these two. Remember that with an experiment, you have to have an experiment. With theoretical probability, you're thinking about what are all the possibilities that could happen. And go ahead and write, what's the difference between theoretical and experimental probability? I kind of just told you the answer. All right, now check your work. Theoretical is what should happen in theory based on listing all the possibilities, while experimental is based on an experiment. So you have to do an actual experiment. All right, so if you flip a coin 4 times, it should be 2 and 2. Take a look at the next one. Try the next one before I show you the answer. In 20 times, how many should be heads? How many should be tails? Well, again, there's there's one side that's heads and one side that's tails, so it should be half and half, 10 and 10. That's what should happen. That's the theoretical probability. But now you should actually grab a coin and flip it 4 times. If you don't have a coin at home, we can do this also in class. You could choose any kind of a tile or any toy and flip it and see what will happen. So your results will vary. Example, maybe I got 3 times I got heads and 1 time a tail. Notice that these are different from the theoretical probability. In theory, you should get them half of the time heads, half of the time tails, but in real life, what really happens might be different. So based on your experiment, predict what will happen if you flip a coin 50 or 20 times. Now you need to use the actual data here. So write down how many times it was a head out of the total and then multiply by 20. I would have gotten 15 and 5. See what you would get. And we'll compare when we get to class. Now flip 20 times. What will happen? What did happen? So actually do this. Again, we will complete this again in class to compare our results together. And then we'll fill out the table. So it's okay to stop at this point and look back on what you've learned. Hopefully you are understanding the difference between theoretical and experimental probability.